To kick it off, just wanted to quickly introduce myself as well as the expert panelists that are going to be joining us today. My name is Cara Henning. I work on the Flywheel team as a senior media manager, and we'll kick it off with introducing Ryan Monigan, the VP of Strategy and Insights at WhyteSpyder. Ryan, thanks so much for coming back and joining us today.
Hey, Cara, it was good to talk to you. Thanks.
And also on the line with us is Toby Willse, Associate Director of Omnichannel at Flywheel. Toby, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Always fun.
Great. So let's kick it off then to the meat of our discussion here today and start by, really unpacking Walmart's new ad experience. We're specifically going to be focusing here today on the new second price bidding model that just rolled out just a few weeks ago, and talking about its impact to advertisers and how advertisers can use it to be more effective overall. So Ryan, to start off, would love you to talk through and summarize some of the recent changes on Walmart and get your overall opinion on, how it's been impacting advertisers thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of start with the mechanics of the change, the definition between first price and second price auction is, in a first price auction, if I'm bidding $10 per click and my competitor is bidding $1, in first price, you pay $10. It doesn't matter how much more you bid than the second price. That first price is what you get charged. Second price means you can set a max bid of $10, and if the second competitor in the auction is only bidding $1, you get charged somewhere between that max bid and that second price. And that somewhere in between is definitely a fuzzy concept for sure. Walmart has, I guess they themselves call it a modified second price auction. So for example, other second price auctions, if you bid $10 and your competitor bids $1, you get charged $1.01. Again, Walmart is somewhere in between that range. And the inputs that go into that CPC that you eventually get charged are taking into account relevancy, right? The Walmart's organic algorithm is geared to serve the most relevant product to the consumer, the product that's going to turn a click into a sale at the highest rate. So when a sponsored product gets elevated above those organic results, it's Walmart's own system saying, I'm willing to put a less relevant item at the top because it's offset by ad revenue. So in that model where they're balancing top line sales and ad revenue, the less relevant the product, the more you're going to have to pay. And that's that factor that lands that eventual CPC somewhere between your $10 max bid and the next competitor's single dollar bid. Toby, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the results that we've seen? Obviously cost savings, right? But to what extent and how is that impacting Flywheel's business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with these changes, when we've kind of looked into an overall analysis, we've seen that the impacts to CPCs has been one of the greatest changes. Our overall manual campaigns have, seen a pretty massive change in cost at about a 22% decline month over month when we compare that pre versus post. And that's allowed us to really be able to stretch those dollars further and drive greater impression volume, greater click volume, and a higher overall return for our clients. Which has meant that we've been able to then reinvest those dollars into different places that are going to help continue to drive that business. I know there's a lot of love here for SBA campaigns, as well as different placements that can factor outside of just on site. Ryan, what are your opinions on how these different changes can impact the ability to reuse those dollars in places that are going to help drive client business?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's an opportunity to reinvest and kind of get more for the same investment. It's definitely not like take that savings and take your ball and go home. It gives advertisers an opportunity to work within their existing framework, but get better results out of it. Like you said, those clicks and impressions going up drastically across the board. So what in first price auction, when you were bidding $10 and paying $10, your budget only lasted, let's call it, cap outs were happening earlier in the day. That's the meat of it. A cap out meaning you set your daily budget. As the clicks happen on the website, that budget gets exhausted. And at a certain point, there's no dollars left in the bank for that day. And therefore you can't participate in the auction anymore. So this cost savings, when it costs less per click, you get more clicks. And therefore those daily budgets extend farther and farther in the day. If you were capping out at 2 p.m. Pacific time in a first price auction, you're likely not capping out till 3, 4, 5 p.m. In the second price auction. So everybody got cost savings. Everybody got more placements throughout the day. Toby, you mentioned the incredible results we're showing from manual campaigns, and I'll share some of that information on a slide here. But what we see is when we are hyper targeted with, we want this item to appear in this keyword, that precise control allows us not only to save more money faster, but it also boosts that performance. So when everybody got more for the same amount or more for less, those who were hyper targeted through manual campaigns, which is the hallmark of both Flywheel and WhyteSpyder media strategy, the revenue associated with everybody getting more came more quickly to those who are really specifically targeting, knowing where their shopper is and explicitly targeting the shopper there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent call out. That the bread and butter of the WhyteSpyder Flywheel strategy is definitely that manual campaign. And you can see that with those stats that you're kind of calling out here. The greatest cost savings and performance increases are coming from the manual campaigns. And it's not because of an effect of more ad spend going towards them, though that, of course is true. It's really an effect of, to your point, the ability to target that in-grid placement is really where the cost savings came in most effectively. So an auto campaign isn't going to see the same kind of benefits of these changes in the second price auction that a manual campaign will see, because of the facets of how it serves and where it often places across the site in those carousels, both on item pages and search, as opposed to those in-grid placements where you're going to see better bang for your buck and see a better overall cost savings from these changes, not only to the second price auction, but the relevancy hurdles we've covered in past topics.
So it sounds like from a cost savings perspective, that's very, very much a given with the second price auction rollout. Also sounds a little bit like it's unlocked the ability for advertisers to be more aggressive in certain placements that they wanted to be, on site in the past and may not have, been willing to risk in the first price auction setup, that they might not have been willing to risk to get, themselves visibility on. So now that there are those increased cost savings, what are some specific recommendations that you, Ryan and Toby, have in terms of where they should reinvest their dollars on Walmart?
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, SBAs, search brand amplifiers, continue to be, I'd say, an untapped resource. We're bringing that strategy, that option to our clients every day because we see the benefit of it. We're growing SBA spends, but not at the same rate that we're growing in-grid. There's a couple of reasons for that, but overall, I see a less competitive arena in SBAs, just because I'd say less informed or more traditional agencies aren't aware of the benefits of that ad unit and aren't taking advantage of it as quickly. But I'll give you another kind of couple data points here to show why that performance really backs up our belief in SBAs. So just what is an SBA? It's that box that you see before the search grid, right? So it's a nice hybrid between an in-grid placement that we know drives a high rate of conversion and a traditional display ad that we know is generally tracking against impressions. So it's a nice hybrid ad unit, and it's also not subject to the same relevancy hurdles and restrictions that in-grid is. That's not to say that any item, regardless of organic performance or optimization or relevance, can get itself into an SBA, but those restrictions are loosened. So what does that mean for our advertisers' portfolios and where to apply this? It's great for new items. It's a less expensive impression generator than your traditional display media. It targets the consumer in the search environment that they're on as they're typing or they're searching for category terms that your product participates in. They're seeing that again before the search results. So honestly, it doesn't drive the same level of conversion, but it's an incredibly efficient impression driver. And when I say efficient, like I said, we're growing our spend in SBAs in the mid single digit, but you can see here that the impressions with just a 2 to 3% increase in spend, impressions are going up 1 to 1. In-grid is, more than 1 to 1. It's 56 to 1 basically. In-grid, we see impressions growing with at the same rate as spend, even though cost savings is present, CPCs are down. It almost takes $1 to gain $1 in-grid, where that rate of increase in terms of paying for impressions and getting your product in front of the consumer that will ultimately drive conversion down the line is really, really efficient on the SBA side.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. And that's such a good viewpoint that SBAs are really an impression driver. In the future tense, they might also be a great conversion driver as Walmart continues to evolve that placement. But you're thinking about it in such a unique way, which is really leveraging that impression push and thinking about it. And even though it's a cost per click basis, that CPM is so low, and those clicks don't occur as often as they would occur on to your point, an in-grid, that you often see that savings is there, and it almost acts like a display campaign, which brings me to a great caveat. With those SBAs, I know the people on the call here and just many clients we work with, SBAs can vary in performance. Sometimes they have really great drivers, and that awareness driving can really result in some fantastic increases in top line. But other times they might see not that benefit, and with the lower conversion driving that they occur, manufacturers and sellers might be a little scared to reinvest there with those cost savings. Another area that I see, really fantastic approach, if you don't find SBAs to, potentially be your cup of tea, or they don't work potentially for your brand, I do think that's a good starting point for most brands, and they should be looking at that first and foremost, but is display. Display has really grown out on Walmart in the last few months, particularly because of their push to try to bring in the agency lens and allow the expert agency players to come in and start managing that. So, Flywheel can now manage via their self-serve and API operations, both on-site and off-site display. And we see that display has become a really strong area to begin investing if run properly and targeting the right consumer set, using the methodology that Flywheel brings to any of our display actions. It allows us to hit a consumer basis that otherwise could not be targeted from those on-site targeting placements or those more keyword granular delivery methods. That audience contextual behavioral targeting that we can leverage allows us to drive that bigger visibility viewpoint, and it allows us to make sure that consumer follows that entire marketing funnel, and we can take them from A to Z, where we can then capture them with that in-grid placement or that SBA placement that allows us to get a nice visibility of the whole catalog. That really brings us to seeing the overall ability to leverage Walmart's team and their product team that we have such a great relationship with, and really lets us set our clients up for success, because that SBA placement is so powerful from a visibility standpoint. We want to take that to the next level as well for those clients that might not see that performance come out of it, and leverage those display placements that come with a very similar learning curve of that giant impression gain, but it requires a very nuanced approach.
You have to balance all three, Toby. You mentioned 3 elements of top, middle, and bottom of funnel: display driving the impressions, SBA being that nice middle ground, and then the conversion driving tactics of in-grid. So how awesome is that within Walmart's platform, you can hit all 3 sections of the funnel? And then, we haven't even talked about offsite, how that can, explode traffic and sales and share as you're driving consumers back to a retailer website from offsite targeting. But yeah, totally agree with, it's myopic to think that one type of placement will achieve all of your goals, whether it's sales or marketing. So definitely agree with you there. It's a full throttle approach from three different viewpoints.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a very custom lens, right? So every manufacturer, every seller is different. Each of those 3 facets are going to play a role. It's how do you leverage those different roles?
Yeah, I agree.
So we talked quite a bit about kind of SBA performance, and something that I think a lot of advertisers have top of mind is just how highly visible that placement is compared to the search and grid placements, especially on desktop, and especially even more so when searching on mobile device. So curious on your guys' perspective on the differences in metrics that we just shared, if there's a difference between mobile and desktop, or how you think that strategy in terms of SBA should differ with how consumers are trafficking now.
Yeah, I would say understanding your role in the category will lead you down one path versus the other. I mean, we just talked about how it's important to have top, middle, and bottom funnel tactics, but again, your role in the category might determine your investment in one versus the other. If you're a new brand, if you're I guess the buzzword now is digitally native, or a direct-to-consumer brand that is now kind of participating in the retailer environment, awareness is probably your number one tactic, and that's where its display and SBA can get you those impressions that ultimately will fuel your top line and increase conversions. In more mature categories, let's take laundry detergent, for example. If you're P&G and Church & Dwight battling over a few points of share in a $1 billion category, stealing clicks, shares, and traffic, and ultimately share from your competition happens at the top of the search grid. When people search laundry detergent, not declaring their intent to buy Tide versus Arm & Hammer, you want to make sure that your brand has the dominant share of voice of the top of that page one search result. So that's where, in grid advertising is like paying to get a better modular placement in store, right? If Tide's the incumbent brand and you're trying to be a challenger brand, what would be better than getting placement in the strike zone of the modular as people walk up and see the physical shelf? The digital shelf is dynamic. It doesn't have to wait for a 6-month mod reset to change. It can change hourly, daily, by the minute. So that's where I think, big brands definitely are utilizing that tactic, but as they get, our goal is to help them make their campaigns more efficient first and foremost, and that through efficiency and reinvestment, we can make more of an impact. So again, I would say, where are you in the category? Do you need to advertise to drive impressions, or is your main goal, is awareness not a barrier? It's really just hitting the consumer when they're at that point of purchase to decide, do I want to buy your brand or your competitors?
Yeah, I think this goes really well into I know a conversation we've had in the past about kind of those clicky and scrolly categories, right? The average consumer in much of like CPG, for instance, it's a very clicky category. So having that placement, even if it's not an awareness play, but your goal is to drive sales, you're not worried about awareness. I've got the awareness. I'm a big brand, but I still need to drive those sales. That top placement in grid is going to be the placement that's going to help drive that through, because those consumers are really only looking at that top 10 placements. As they continue to shop, they're going to refine their search as opposed to scrolling. And so it's really important to think about that. And I think, WhyteSpyder does such a good job of this, is really thinking about, all right, what category do I live in? How important is this placement? And is there an opportunity for me to instead play in a more, again, to your point, an efficiency play? Do I live in hard lines? Do I live in electronics, where it might make sense to place in like a middle of the fold slot, where I'm sitting right in the middle of the search results, because it's going to be a lower cost, but it's going to be a higher overall return rate for me, because that consumer is scrolling. Oftentimes, with the now non-mirroring effect and the second price auction, we can find an ability to place yourself in a top placement if you're already organically in the middle, or vice versa, and play that game dynamically to make sure that you're hitting a consumer basis that is going to then convert, and then leverage those other placements that you had mentioned, to really hit on those low-hanging fruit opportunities. I myself love the buy box placement. I find it to be highly converting. It is a really, really strong placement to be in. It is hard to target, but we found ways to go after it. And it definitely does drive quite a nice return. But to your point, Ryan, it's not a scalable approach, right? It is an add-on to an overall greater strategy that should be focused in on those in-grid results.
Toby, one of the things that you've educated me on is the kind of point of diminishing returns kind of down the search page, right? Everybody knows that spot 1 is better than spot 10, but in certain categories, that gap or that ratio is much wider and much more concentrated at the top. And I love looking at that kind of diminishing returns analysis that you guys do to say, based on how the shopper shops my category, clicky versus scrolly. I love that term. In the clicky categories, when it's just type in a search term, buy what shows up, yeah, position 11, 12, 13, or 11 and 12 where you can advertise is not as impactful. But electronics, like you mentioned, very scrolly, right? So you can get incredibly efficient placements farther down the search grid that oftentimes or sometimes convert at a higher rate than the ones at the top of the search grid. So love that perspective from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you all have quite a bit of data sources showing that Walmart in itself is very much CPG focused, right? Grocery is there. That's the name of the game over there, particularly right now with online. And so that entire area is so important to be in those top placements. Consumers are not just scrolling through an endless list of chocolate, right? They've got the top 10, they know what they want to buy. And if they don't see it in those top 10, they're going to refine to those branded searches. And that's why you all are so smart about the approach to, and I feel like Flywheel's learned a lot about like how do we approach branded? Do you in a second price auction world, do you even bid on branded these days, or is there a reason to?
The reason to, thanks for the softball question, Toby, but I hate branded placements unless it has a purpose. I hate wasted clicks on brands. If somebody's declaring their intent to buy your brand by typing your brand name into the search box, you probably don't need to advertise them to them, with two exceptions. One is manipulating your own loyal brand users, not manipulating, that might be a negative connotation, but selling different products to the person that you've already acquired through your brand. So new products and upsell, driving innovation and increasing AUR. If the top of your organic search grid for your brand name is $5 price points and you just released a $7.50 price point, then yeah, you want to drive your existing consumers to those higher price points. And then, like I said, new items. If you can add an item to the basket, if someone is generally buying the same roll of paper towels and you want to sell them, an additional roll of paper towels, let's say, then you can advertise those items. Again, talking to your own existing brand users. But our focus is when somebody types in paper towels and they can choose your brand versus anybody else's brand, we want to have your brand have that dominant share of voice, so you get the corresponding share growth from it.
Great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's the branded search terms there's a rhyme and a reason, but to your point, it's few and far in between. There are certain reasons why you should go in, and I think you tagged them all perfectly. It's always should be cruciary to the main goal, which is going after that category and focusing your efforts there, and then leveraging the low cost of branded, especially with the second price auction change, to try to trade up consumers or trade them in.
We've touched on a lot of different placements in this conversation so far. So Toby, I'm going to put you on the spot. So if you're an advertiser, where are you investing, your clients' first dollars when it comes to display versus in-grid versus sponsor brand amplifier? And you touched on buy box placements as well. Can you elaborate a little bit further there?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about any particular supplier or seller, it's going to depend on each and every one of them in their unique basis, particularly going back to that clicky scrolly. What category do you live in? But when it comes down to it, I would always recommend investing bottoms up. So you want to make sure that you are supporting yourself, especially when, for some of these larger manufacturers out there, if you're running any kind of linear TV, you're running social, you're running these offsite advertising effects, they're going to have an effect. The consumer has to land somewhere, right? They need to purchase. And to purchase, they're going to end up on a retailer, generally one of the big three, or a direct-to-consumer site. Oftentimes, we're trying to drive those consumers to one of the big three, in particular here, Walmart. So what's most important is that you are there and visible to the consumer when they arrive to the site. So we want to make sure that you're first investing into sponsored products, to Ryan's point that he made in the beginning of this conversation, in grid. That's where we really should start out. And then you want to tack on those tertiary placements of buy box. Can I hit those targeting consumers? And utilize those dollars to then build out your funnel. For display, it is such an important factor of it, but it is a factor that you need to think about with your greater overall display activations. If you are activating outside of Walmart display and you feel that that investment is helping drive, you need to be able to look at that data and overlay it. Flywheel and WhyteSpyder have a great way of being able to work with suppliers and work with manufacturers and sellers to understand and overlay data that you might have from offsite or outside advertising and say, okay, is this actually impacting your search? And if it's not impacting your POS and your top line sales for Walmart, then we need to see what changes need to be made. Are we driving the consumer directly? So it really comes down to, and I know I've kind of tangented here, it really comes down to make sure you are effectively visible on site and then work your way up. Sponsored brand amplifiers, item buy box, and leverage that display if it makes sense. There's a lot of reasons it does, but if you're already doing outside advertising, you want to talk to an expert, talk to your agency, talk to Flywheel or WhyteSpyder, and try to understand, does it make sense to invest in that display? It often does, but you need to make sure that it matches perfectly with what you're already doing off site. Don't target the same consumer. Make sure that you're hitting each part of the funnel so that you're not double dipping into the same activation and driving similar results that are going to look rosy, but they won't actually provide you with a true to form increase, which is where Flywheel and WhyteSpyder can come in and provide that indication.
I want to touch on a point you made there, Toby, of like looking at advertising through the individual shopper's eyes. I think both of our companies do a great job of surveying what the search environment looks like to the individual consumer. Where is your item organically? Where can it be through paid search? That's basically the cornerstone of our strategy. Obviously, we have that data available through SKU Ninja, available through Flywheel to recognize that. I want to caution against just relying on click-through rate and CPC and ROAS to determine a successful campaign. The analogy I use all the time is, if I offered you a billboard in Times Square and it cost $1 million, would you expect $1 million return on investment, i.e. a 1-to-1 ROAS tomorrow? No, you would be like, well, if I don't get it, my competitors would be there and I'd hate to drive past that billboard every day and see my competitor. Now, trust me, we're all here to move units and sell more dollars. So conversion is incredibly important, but just because your item is there and your competitors is not, and the consumer doesn't buy your item from that non-branded keyword, I know there's a ton of research on the Amazon side that shows that exposure in the category terms often causes the shopper to research, to enter a different search term in the box. And unfortunately, Walmart is all about that last touch attribution. If they clicked on the ad there, it doesn't mean they didn't buy it by then. Okay, maybe you got a branded sale from a branded keyword that the non-branded advertisement drove. So I know it's a kind of a fuzzy concept, and it would be contrary to my upbringing as a salesperson to say, don't worry about conversion rate and don't worry about revenue growth. But sometimes you have to invest in those placements that don't directly turn into a sale in order to build that brand momentum and ultimately grow sales and steal share from your competition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's really where that impression growth comes in, right? What we were talking about with SBAs and driving impressions. Because just because you don't see the sale realized via your advertising doesn't mean the sale isn't realized. The advertising may have had an effect, and that's where that overlay comes through. To your point, a lot of like I always go to linear TV. Linear TV has generally a 30-day window where attribution actually comes through. So someone sees that TV ad, they don't actually convert on that product and end up making a purchase, oftentimes 20, 30 days after seeing the TV ad. So there's a long window for an impression to hit the consumer and then that consumer to make that purchase. That window is probably honestly only going to get longer as belts tighten and we move into a period where consumers are being a little bit more thoughtful with their shopping. So to your point, it's really important to make sure that you are visible and that you are easily able to be found by a consumer, whether it be off-site display, on-site display, or more importantly, that on-site search when the consumer is actually already there and buying, so that you can make sure that they don't go to that competitor route. Instead, they're constantly reminded of the product that they should be purchasing, whether they make that purchase via an organic placement, which hopefully is high up and visible, or via an advertising placement.
So to sum it up, it's probably an art and a science, or a blend of top line sales increases and share of voice increase. Both contribute equally to successful campaigns.
Correct. Well, I 100% agree. I would dare say that, oftentimes on the Flywheel side, and I know you all look at this very similarly, ROAS is to us more of a guide rail. It's not a benchmark. It's not something we steer towards. We want to steer towards top line sales and share growth, and then use ROAS as a way to say, okay, my advertising is still being efficient. I'm still making some dollars back on this, but that ROAS really shouldn't be a guiding light. It should be a railing to say, okay, I don't want to fall off the bridge, but I want to make sure I'm getting over it.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so I mean, from what we've been seeing, it seems like the majority of advertisers are over investing in that, sponsored in-grid placement more so than they are in other placements. So to piggyback off what you just said, Toby, do you think it's more so of a fixation on ROAS as a metric and not understanding how some of those other placements may be contributing to overall top line? Or is it, looking for placements on site that are just going to drive those quick conversions?
I would dare say it's a bit more of a gray area, right? I certainly think that there are definitely agencies, advertisers, suppliers, sellers who are all focused on ROAS a little bit too much, and that's where a lot of automation comes in, right? And why it's not always super effective to only run an automated strategy, like an AI-based strategy, is because those AI-based strategies are all generally focused on return. So that ROAS mark may return a really pretty number. But to kind of what Ryan was alluding to before, the organic is often a more important long-term play. You need to be looking all the way down the field as opposed to just looking at the next line. So it's really important that you're thinking about it that way. So I see it as more of a what is most difficult for, I think, most advertisers out there today is, how do I look at the bigger picture? How do I take all these different pieces and silos of data and put them together and be able to truly understand, is this all working? Or does it all look like it's working in little pieces and bits, but when I put it together, none of it actually really tells a true story? Because if it's not telling a true story, it's probably not working. And so it's more and more understanding that and trying to figure out how to leverage that data. MMM modeling has been around forever, and even they are starting to look into kind of the color for e-commerce. E-commerce has a lot of different nuance and color that you need to layer in that isn't seen in just that raw data format that's been used for years. And so more and more, suppliers and sellers are starting to understand that they need to look at all of these different facets and merge them together. And I think Walmart is trying to get ahead of that. I know that Ryan alluded to it before as well. It is a last click attribution model. They are more and more trying to figure out how do I get to where Amazon is today, with really going into that, and even Instacart has done it recently, going into that multi-touch attribution. Walmart's starting to explore that as well, and it's going to be such a key to making sure that their data sets are constantly evolving and giving suppliers what they need to be able to make that educated decision with every dollar they invest.
The other thing to consider is the lifetime value of acquiring new users to your brand, right? If you can advertise to someone who's shopping your category and is not considering your brand, if you can advertise to get them into your brand, yeah, you want to convert that first purchase. I spend $1, I want to get $1 in return, but you may not need to advertise to that individual over and over and over throughout the lifetime of their time in the category. You acquire them through that first attribution or that first click from a sponsored search, but then they're in your brand. They're a loyalist for the lifetime of, like I said, their time in the category. So it's myopic to think that it's a 1-to-1 ratio of the dollars spent on advertising and the dollars returned in that kind of, like you said, 14-day attribution window, which is what Walmart works with. And then to your point, Toby, even longer attribution windows, lifetime attribution windows, when we talk about that. The other thing I hear too is I didn't see a huge lift in my POS when I had a tangible increase in my ad spend. And what I'll say there is two things. One, growth or being flat. You might be flat with advertising. You might have declined without the advertising, right? So a 1% growth doesn't mean I only grew 1%. You might have prevented a 5% decline, especially, like I said, in mature categories, as macroeconomic factors are declining a lot of those mature and traditionally growing categories. The other thing I'll mention is just understanding where your sales are coming from and chasing incrementality. Incrementality is the hardest thing to define in the world of analytics. But what we see is that sometimes almost 80% of sales come from branded keywords. So it's the largest volume, but that's the sales that you should be getting. Our strategy is laser focused on gaining incrementality, not paying for sales that would have happened, but it's those incremental sales that are going to make you achieve your KPIs for sales for the quarter or for the year. You need 100% of the branded searchers to convert on your product. So advertising can help that. It can defend against third parties. It can defend against private label when private labels allowed into the search results for your branded keywords. But it's those jump ball categories. It's paper towels as opposed to bounty paper towels. Paper towels offers you that incrementality. It may only be 20% of the users are not sure which brand they want to buy before they visit the retailer website, but those are the ones that are going to help you, like I said, grow share in the category.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you in that the long-term loyalty play, I think is such an important one. You know, often we talk to clients and we go with the same exact approach you do. I think we're very lockstep there on that incrementality first approach. And when we talk to clients, often that is our end goal, is how do we make it so that every time you're investing, your dollars aren't just constantly increasing year over year, because that's going to become unattainable at some point. And instead, how do I shift those dollars? Okay, my top 10 items are now stable organically. They're in a great spot. I've been able to grow them up. Let's start focusing those dollars on the next 10. How do I constantly shift that dynamic of my advertising so that instead of increasing my budget year over year over year, you're realizing how you can use that budget efficiently and change the advertising while growing your catalog by leveraging your organic. The advertising, you turn it off and the sales go away, right? Organic, that doesn't happen. You turn it off and you keep growing because you built your organic properly.
You maybe think of a great metaphor that I use all the time to explain digital advertising or digital promotion, let's call it, as opposed to in-store promotion. If your buyer came to you today and said, I can get you an off-shelf display on any item in your portfolio, you're going to pick the number one item, because a 20% increase from that off-shelf exposure is going to mean more tangible dollars on your number one item than your number 100 item. Digital advertising, search advertising kind of works the opposite. Toby, you hit the nail on the head. Our job as advertisers is to make you less dependent on advertising, because we want to expose your product to the consumer and then have them really switch them from a non-branded searcher to a branded searcher, right? That is going to expand that lifetime value. But in-grid search advertising actually should be focused on the torso to tail of your portfolio. If you have the number one item in the category, it better be at the top of organic search, right? You shouldn't need to advertise or promote that item. It's those items that are at the top of page 2, at the top of page 3, that would not be on the consumer's radar without that advertisement. Now, to your point, Toby, we want to make sure that manufacturers aren't dependent on always getting their item from page 2 to page 1 through paid search. There's a whole other webinar we could do on that, but just the concept of applying this promotion to the not the top items in your portfolio is something that, once I realized, kind of changed my perspective on how we go to market. And I think most suppliers can kind of learn from that experience as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It really is a mechanism of understanding, how do I support that torso and tail? How do I bring them up? There's nothing that gives me more heartburn when I'm in a category and doing some analysis and I see that a brand is advertising products that are already their strongest products. Mm-hmm. Like big brands, it's their strongest product. You don't need to work with them to know that. And it's so frustrating to see them serving and be like, why are you doing this?
Well, now the search grid tells you what your biggest organic product is, because it still lives in that organic position. So if you're seeing sponsored ad for a product at position 1 and that item duplicated at position 5, that's a clear indicator that Toby's going to get some heartburn.
Exactly. There is a rhyme and a reason to duplication, and it can be helpful in a scrolly category to showcase. We talked about it before. If you're selling a TV, you showcase that TV at the top of the page, and then you get middle of the page, and that TV is also there organically. That's making sure the consumer sees it twice, right? But to your point, when you're selling a chocolate bar and it's the same thing, it's probably not going to have the same effect. So it's really thinking about, how does it make sense for the category, and should I be advertising my top item? There are very few reasons why the answer is yes. There certainly can be a yes, but generally speaking, you want to go after that torso.
I mean, duplication didn't used to exist prior to these algorithm changes on Walmart. The second price auction didn't used to exist. So it's definitely by all means an ever-changing landscape. So I know that a lot of, manufacturers are looking for strategies to stay ahead and how to keep themselves in the forefront of consumers' minds and be up to date on their advertising strategy. So I'd love to bring this to, kind of a real world example of if you're a category leader, Toby and Ryan, what are some efficiencies that you're using, some levers that you're pulling as an advertiser to keep yourself ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the things that I think about right away is just staying really close and building a relationship with both your Walmart representatives, so your WMC rep, your merchant, your buyer, and your agency. You want to make sure that they are working in tandem together and that you are getting the best out of both of them. You're going to hear different things, and you're always going to be sold into things when you're talking to Walmart or any retailer. That's just the name of the game. They're going to try to sell you into things, but they're also going to give you a lot of insight and help you understand how things are changing. With Walmart, you hit the nail on the head, and Ryan, I know you've talked about it in depth on a previous webinar, is that they're organic, so not even their auction, but their overall site is changing constantly right now. It is in a moment of flux where it is going to be shifting quite a bit as they kind of figure out their foothold. They've done a wonderful job with the advertising side, switching to the second price auction, these great cost savings we've seen and talked about today, and how consumers can now find items that they might have never seen before, because the smaller kids, the smaller advertisers can now play. They can get above the fold. And so thinking about how do I strategize, and really plan for 2023 and planning ahead, how do I think about where can I leverage that advertising that now is even more efficient than ever, but how can I also partner with WMC? How can I partner with Walmart to understand how are things going to continue to change? If you can get ahead of the curve there and build that relationship and make sure that your agency has a strong relationship with your Walmart team, it's going to allow you to be so much further ahead than anyone else in the space. We've seen time and time again that the brands that want us to work really closely with their Walmart representatives have seen the best impacts because they build this partnership where Flywheel, WhyteSpyder, and the Walmart teams are working together in tandem, and it allows insights that they might not otherwise provide. It allows a lot of in-depth reporting. It allows a lot of understanding of how things are going to change, and being partners with someone who is an API partner like WhyteSpyder and Flywheel together, both having different API partnerships with Walmart, also gives an inside look behind the wheel of what is going to happen in 6 months, what's going to release, what's going to change, and it's going to allow you to prepare ahead of time, because if you don't, you are constantly going to be behind. It's basically just taking that step and letting someone cut ahead of you a line and just saying, oh, I'm fine in the back of the line, and you're never going to make it up to that water fountain. You want to be at the front of the line.
Cara, going back to your question on what are we doing with our kind of category leading manufacturers that we've worked with for a long time, after 6, 8, 12 months, this idea of cutting the fat, adopting our strategy has been executed. So we have the framework for growth kind of set in place. From there, it's as simple as being nimble enough to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves from Monday to Tuesday. And what I mean by that, it's as simple as understanding where CPCs are declining, where competitors are dropping out of the auction, and taking advantage of it, right? I'm not talking about wholesale changes of funding a category versus another category. It's within that category. There's generally 5 to 10 keywords that we're advertising on, and at that keyword level, it's a combination of granularity and nimbleness. At the keyword level, where are CPCs taking a nosedive, and how quickly can I transfer funds from one keyword into another? If I'm selling, the cheese category, whether it's cheese, shredded cheese, mozzarella cheese, American cheese, all of my products fit those keywords. And yeah, I want to drive performance on cheese, but for some reason, if a competitive manufacturer dropped out of the cheese slices auction and CPCs go from $1.50 to 75 cents, I'm turning around like that and I'm funneling investment there. Once the framework's in place, it's about finding those efficiencies and attacking them, not reinventing your strategy all the time. It sounds really simple. hopefully everybody agrees that it's the intuitive, intelligent thing to do. And then, you got to have partners that are willing to put in the horsepower, the time, the hands-on keyboard to do that. Even the biggest manufacturers we work with don't have that position staffed where they're walking the aisles every day. They're analyzing daily CPC changes on your campaigns and making those daily adjustments. First of all, you need to have the partnership with the agency that has that intelligence and that access, but then it's staffing and it's human resources to have a eyeballs on this every day and proactively making changes.
Well, with the short period of time that we have left, the conversation has definitely spurred a lot of questions from the audience. So if you have not already, shot a question in the comment box there, feel free to do so, and we're going to answer a few of those live. But would like to start off with Toby, actually. You mentioned that your favorite placement was the buy box placement. So there's a question from the audience in regards to how you target the buy box. And this advertiser thought that you could only leverage auto campaigns to target this specific placement. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a great question. So no, you can use manual campaigns. The release that Walmart came out with a few months ago, Ryan and I were actually just talking about it prior to this. It's tricky. It was not built in a way that is very easy for the average advertiser to be able to activate, especially if you're doing like a self-serve and you're running it yourself. I don't blame you for not understanding how to do it. It's complicated. Essentially, you can use manual campaigns, and how Flywheel and WhyteSpyder approach it is we will take a manual campaign and we'll put those bids really low. We'll then use multipliers to place ourselves so that we can focus on those buy box placements. How you target what buy box you're going to go after is where it gets unique with Walmart. You have to target the item name of the product. Item names can change at any time. You have to be really on top of what you want to target. Walmart's going to suggest broad match to be able to hit a largest pool possible. I actually love that approach. That's why you want to go with a really low base bid, because if you don't do that and you don't leverage those placement multipliers, what's going to happen is that broad match, you're just going to start to serve an in-grade all over the place. Your performance is going to tank. Your spend is going to skyrocket. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about it really smartly. Obviously, everything I've just said is how do I do that at scale? It's difficult. And that's why you want to partner with an agency that can manage that for you. So, WhyteSpyder and Flywheel can do that at scale by using the proprietary tools we've built, but you can activate this at any time, even if you were just doing it self-serve through the methods I just walked through.
Great. So another question, and I'll let Toby or Ryan jump in if you see fit, but what happens if I'm investing and I see no organic increase with an increase in my ad impressions?
So I think there's two definitions of organic there. One is organic sales, right? I would say, I love Walmart reports on sales through ads from their platform. That is a small portion of the overall sales, right? The POS report that shows, every sale generated on the item is what you should kind of use to evaluate, am I headed in the right direction? That's where I was saying, compare it to benchmark it, right? If you're increasing 10% your ad budget year over year, and you're only seeing a 1% year over year sales growth, consider where the category is headed, right? Again, plus 1% could be a 10-point delta between +1 and -9. So, take everything into consideration. The other thing is, it goes back to that, where were you going to be from an organic search position standpoint without that advertisement, right? So yes, we want every dollar spent in ads to return more than $1 in top line sales, but it's, would you have the opportunity to even get on the consumer's radar if you weren't inorganically increasing your placement in the search grid?
So earlier on in the conversation, we were sharing some metrics in regards to SBA performance versus other campaign types. And we know that consumers are starting to use their mobile devices. Sometimes even when they're in store, they're, compare shopping and they're looking at their mobile devices to see if it's cheaper to buy there versus cheaper to buy in store. Do we have any details we can share in regards to how performance metrics differ between mobile and desktop?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is I'll have to get back to you on that. With kind of hot off the press, relatively new data, we didn't break it down mobile versus desktop. I would say with any analysis, yes, I would love to see that split, and we'll provide that split, and maybe it'll be a fast follow to the webinar. But is it something you're able to action? If I told you that, yeah, desktop is or mobile is performing so much better than desktop, yeah, you can do bid multipliers to target one platform versus another, but in this case, it's important to have a holistic approach. You can't abandon one versus the other just because it's performing better. And often the juice isn't worth the squeeze to are you targeting a different audience? Yeah, of course, mobile users skew maybe younger, maybe more affluent, but at the same time, I like to say the Walmart search grid is a great cross section of America, and you're advertising to the average consumer, and as well as both ends of the spectrum, the non-average consumer. So a lot of these campaigns are meant to target the consumer wherever they are. If they're on the mobile, if they're on the app, if they're on the desktop, you still want to influence that digital shelf regardless of the platform. But Toby mentioned it, or I think Cara, you mentioned it, when you're on your mobile device, that SBA as a percentage of real estate on your screen is incredibly large. So, that's something that will inform our decisions going forward as we understand performance across both those platforms. But to kind of tie a bow on all that, we'll provide a split of our data by platform.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. Only thing I would love to add there is just with the way that Walmart is built out, unlike Amazon or Target are great examples. Their ad product on app is different than what appears on desktop. So like for Amazon, for example, you have one above the fold ad slot. It's the only thing that pops up, right? After that huge real estate sponsored brand ad, very similar to the SBA on Walmart. But on Walmart, you have the same ad slots, the same amount of ad slots that dynamically appear. It's just a longer scroll, an endless scroll on Walmart, whereas on these others, it's not. So that means that the metrics are going to likely be very similar to Ryan's point. It's a different consumer basis, but you have to have that holistic strategy. So we'll follow up with that. I know you'll likely all be seeing a pretty nice little blast coming from us in the coming weeks on a full recap of the second price auction change. But it is something that I would think about as less should I go one or the other, and more how do I effectively use both.
So, with the main topic of our webinar here today, the second price auction. So Ryan and Toby, if I'm an advertiser and I'm making my, starting my planning process for fiscal year 23, second price auction, we talked about it, potentially being a cost savings, potentially just unlocking our ability to be more aggressive in certain placements. How should I, as an advertiser, start to think about planning and budgeting for next year?
It's the number one question I get. And the answer is you need to understand what percentage of traffic is up for grabs from non-branded keywords, right? We talked about incrementality being the number one factor and advertising to only the shoppers that weren't going to buy your product anyway. What percentage of traffic comes from non-branded keywords in your category? That kind of gives you a good idea of, do I need to invest in Ingrid and SBAs, or should I maybe shift towards display, where Kleenex is the ultimate example of, that's a branded keyword, but that's also what we call the category of facial tissues, right? So if you are Kleenex and you have that stronghold, you probably don't need to be targeting facial tissue all day every day, but again, that's where the incrementality is. The alternative to that is, like I said, boosting the brand awareness of your brand through kind of display functions. But ultimately, to answer your question, we help our clients do annual planning all the time. We're always recommending budget increases because we have the metrics to back up that your investment was tangible and showed a good return. But as a quick kind of back of the napkin math, about how many searchers are there per month for these keywords. We can also kind of calculate the average click-through percentage for a category. And if we have some of that history, we can look at some of the average CPCs for those keywords. So it's how many people are searching it, how many people are clicking on those top 4 sponsored product ads, and then on average, how much do you need to spend per click? And the multiplication of those 3 roll up to a pretty accurate budget projection.
Great. Well, that about wraps up all the questions that we have from the audience today. So Toby, Ryan, thank you so much again for joining us today. And for everybody in the audience, thank you for sticking along with us, and be on the lookout for future webinars in regards to, Flywheel and WhyteSpyder together in the future.